Let's get right to it, inshallah ta'ala. We're continuing with these review questions here from How to Debate the So-Called Salafiyyah. And now we want to talk about proof from the Hadith. Question 41. Which Hadith is recommended for refuting the Wahhabi creed? Who knows the answer to that? Yani, there's plenty of Hadiths, but there's one recommended by the book here to be your go-to hadith if you wanted to immediately move to a hadith. And to remind you, I recommend you would even go to this hadith before you go to an ayah from the Quran. And that hadith is the hadith of Imran ibn Husayn. كان الله ولم يكن شيء غيره. Allah existed and there was nothing other than Him. Allah existed and there wasn't anything else. That's an authentic hadith narrated by Al-Bukhari. It's called the Hadith of Imran ibn Husayn. You could use this hadith before you use an ayah from the Quran, because your basic ayah from the Quran is going to be لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. And although this ayah is explicit truly, it means nothing is like Allah in any way, but the Wahhabi doesn't know what it means to say nothing is like Allah. So that statement for a Wahhabi is not clear. For a Wahhabi, any difference between two things is a relative one, not an absolute one, even between Allah and the creations. The difference between Allah and the creations to a Wahhabi is relative, not absolute. That's why he says, well, Allah has hands not like our hands. Do you have hands like a clock hands? Like we talked about last time. When he says to you, do you have hands like a clock hands? Allah doesn't have hands like we have hands, just like your hands are not like the clock hands. That right there is the Wahhabi comparing God to the creation, really. So he doesn't know what it means to say nothing is like Allah. So when you say to him, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, starting with this ayah from the Quran, nothing resembles him in any way, he would say, that's true. You are the one likening Allah to the creations, because you don't know what it means to say He has two hands and a face and two eyes and a smile and fingers, etc. So to avoid that confusion, you could immediately go to the hadith of Imran ibn Husayn. كَانَ اللَّهُ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْءٌ غَيْرُهُ. Allah existed and there wasn't anything else. There is also another hadith that you could go to immediately, but this one is even more immediate. We didn't finish this one first, though. Question 42. How do you use this hadith? You use this hadith by pointing out the fact that this hadith proves that anything other than God was not existing. So you say to that Wahhabi, is a place Allah? So you should say no. Tell him, well, the hadith says Allah existed and there wasn't anything else. And the place is something else. So the place wasn't existing. So that means what? Allah existed what? Without a place. So here he might say, and this is also a proof that he compares God to the creations. He might say, well, that was then, and this is now. So he means to say, Allah has changed since then. Since the existence of creations, Allah has changed. But he's not going to say it that way. He would say, that was then. Because of his simpleton mind. That's blasphemy. If he means, when he says, that was then, if he means to say, Allah has changed since then that's blasphemy. So that's how you use this hadith. You tell him, no, Allah hasn't changed since then. Or if he says, that was then, You say, and he now exists as he existed, like what was reported about Imam Ali. It was reported about Imam Ali that he said, "Kan Allahu ala ma kan, wa huwa al-ana ala ma alayhi kan." Allah was, and there was no place, and he is now as he was. But you know that if you bring this report about Imam Ali, what's the Wahhabis first go to if you were to bring to him this report of Imam Ali? Allah existed, and there was no place, and he is now as he was. The Wahhabi is going to say, this doesn't even have a chain. He will say, this report from Imam Ali is not authentic. It doesn't have a chain. So that's why you don't want to even submit this hadith, this report from Imam Ali, as evidence in your debate. You don't want to submit it as evidence in your debate. Now you might say, but wait a minute, you just right now submitted it. And I would say to you, not really, only for clarity here, because what we're submitting is really the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Kan Allahu alam yakun shay'un ghayruh. That's our proof here for this argument. Allah existed and there wasn't anything else. But then he's going to say, well, that was then, because he's a pagan. So then you could say, not because it's a fundamental proof, but just for clarity here, this is backup, this is just for elaboration now. It complies with your fundamental proof here. It was reported from Imam Ali that Allah existed and there was no place, and now he exists as he existed. Or you can just give him a rational argument and say, that was then, and he is now as he was, like Imam Ali said. Whether you want to say Imam Ali said or not, the issue is still provable and arguable. To say that was then, this is his belief in likening God to the creations in itself. So then you'll have to tackle that right there. If you have any question about that, feel free, please. Question 43. Do the Wahhabis try to explain the difference between what is eternal and what is created? Very good question here. I don't remember any Wahhabi arguing the difference between what's eternal or what's created. Really, for a Wahhabi, it's the same. For a Wahhabi, a body could be eternal because he believes that Allah has a body, an eternal body. And if one body could be eternal, if one body could be eternal, any body could be eternal. And there are Wahhabis who believe in Ibn Taymiyyah's belief of eternal kinds. But let's see what answer we have here in the book for this question. Do the Wahhabis try to explain the difference between what is eternal and what is created? To elaborate on this issue for them, they selected the books of their grandfather, Ibn Taymiyyah. However, in his attempt to rationalize how the Creator could have created attributes, he wound up claiming that types of things exist eternally with Allah. So we were on the money. If a Wahhabi were to talk about this, he's going to, I don't think likely he will talk about the difference between what's eternal and what's created. If he does, then don't be surprised if he talks Ibn Taymiyyah's talk about eternal kinds of things. And we have Ibn Taymiyyah's quotes here about that. You can review, insha'Allah ta'ala. If you want to see those quotes of Ibn Taymiyyah, you can review. So, but fundamentally, they don't talk about the difference between the eternal and the created. The scholars said, if Allah is in a place, then it means either Allah has created or the place is eternal. And the scholars said, the one who believes that God is a body can't even prove that the world is created. If someone believes that God is a body, he cannot prove that the world is created, because he believes in an eternal body. So how could he prove that the world is created when he believes in an eternal body? Because whatever he says to prove, whatever he argues to prove that the world is created is going to apply to what he worships. So he's not able to. Question 44. How is it known that we are created and not eternal? Easy answer, because we change. Change is the greatest sign of createdness. And also another easy, evident indication that we are created and not eternal is that we have edges. Anything that has an edge or a surface is created. And before we go on to the next question, which is under the heading of scholarly quotes, there's another hadith also that you want to have on deck for Wahhabi. The hadith, وَأَنْتَ الظَّاهِرُ فَلَيْسَ فَوْقَكَ شَيْءٍ وَأَنْتَ الْبَاطِنُ فَلَيْسَ دُونَكَ شَيْءٍ. O Allah, you are al-Zahir, and there is nothing above you, and you are al-Batin, and there's nothing below you. Inshallah, we'll come back to talk about this hadith. But this one, as long as you're able to not be distracted from the hadith, also a Wahhabi shouldn't be able to get away from you when you use this hadith. Because like Imam Al-Bayhaqi said, if there's nothing above him and there's nothing below him, then he exists without a place. And also, if you are going to use this hadith, don't focus on the word, on the meaning of the word zahir, and don't focus on the meaning of the word batin. Al-Zahir, that's one of the names of Allah. Al-Batin, that's one of the names of Allah. Oh Allah, you are Al-Zahir, and there's nothing above you. And you are Al-Batin, and there's nothing below you. Yes. Al-Zahir and Al-Batin, those two names of Allah. So if you want, you can say, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "O Allah, you are Al-Zahir, and there's nothing above you, and you are Al-Batin, and there's nothing below you." So if there's nothing above him and there's nothing below him, then he exists without a place. So then what's a Wahhabi going to try? He's going to say, but what does Zahir mean? And what does Batin mean? I would suggest you say, it doesn't even matter. So he might say, no, it matters, it matters. Tell him, okay, what does there's nothing above you mean? And what does there's nothing below you mean? Why aren't you asking about that part? Because you're trying to find a way to undermine that or twist that. That's the part. There's nothing above you and there's nothing below you. Al-Zahir is one of his names and Al-Batin is one of his names. Question 45. Is there a scholar from the Salaf who addressed this issue? Yes, Imam At-Tahawiyy, amongst others, of course. So here's the quote of At-Tahawiyy that's good for you to memorize. This quote of At-Tahawiyy is directly against the Wahhabi creed. Imam At-Tahawiyy said, yes, that's the hadith. Imam At-Tahawiyy said, مَا زَالَ بِصِفَاتِهِ قَدِيمًا قَبْلَ خَلْقِهِ. With his attributes, he never ceased to be without beginning before his creation. لَمْ يَزْدَدْ بِكَوْنِهِمْ شَيْئًا لَمْ يَكُنْ قَبْلَهُمْ مِنْ صِفَتِهِ. He did not acquire any attribute that did not exist before them. So that's, you can give him that also if he says, that was then. Tell him Imam At-Tahawiyy said, though, if you don't want to give him what was reported about Ali, you want to give him something that he can't argue with, Imam At-Tahawiyy said, لم يزدد بكونهم شيئا لم يكن قبلهم من صفته. He did not acquire any attribute that did not exist before them, before the creations. So here you are, Wahhabi, when I gave you the hadith that proves that Allah existed and there wasn't anything else. And you agreed with me, and you agreed with me that the place is something else. So it means then he existed without a place. But then, because you're sick, you said, that was then. And you mean, he changed since then, since he created the creations and created places. Imam At-Tahawiyy, he documented the Muslim creed about that. With his attributes, he never ceased to be without beginning before his creation. He did not acquire any attribute that did not exist before them. وَكَمَا كَانَ بِصِفَاتِهِ أَزَلِيًّا كَذَلِكَ لَا يَزَالُ عَلَيْهَا أَبَدِيًّا. And just as he, with his attributes, is without a beginning, likewise he, with his attributes, shall always be everlasting. So that might look long, but it's really not very long. مَا زَالَ بِصِفَاتِهِ قَدِيمًا قَبْلَ خَلْقِهِ لم يزدد بكونهم شيئا لم يكن قبلهم من صفته وكما كان بصفاته أزليا كذلك لا يزال عليها أبديا. Now I'm curious. Hold on one second. I have here the book of Al-Fawzan, La'natullahi alayhi. His explanation of At-Tahawiyy. I'm curious, what does he say here? Yani, I'm going to react to it right now. Let's see. I don't know what he says here. This is a translation here. So the cover is a brown cover here. Darul Arqam is the publisher. It says Imam Abu Ja'far Al-Tahawiyy, yani At-Tahawiyy, Sharh Al-Aqidah At-Tahawiyya, a commentary on the creed of Imam At-Tahawiyy, commentary by Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan, they say. So it says here, 15, he, along with his attributes, is eternal, existing before his creation. So that's Tahawiyy. So Fawzan says. The author said earlier, eternal without beginning. Nothing came before the Most High. That's true. Nothing came before him. Now, if he wants to try to squeeze Ibn Taymiyyah Aqidah in there, he's going to... That statement doesn't deny, according to them, that there was something with him, a kind of thing with him. Because that was Ibn Taymiyyah's argument. He says, true, nothing existed before Allah. But he wasn't denying that there was some kind of thing with him. But this is what he says here. He says, nothing came before the Most High. When he says Most High, he means in a direction. This means that Allah has the attributes of perfection. His attributes are eternal, with neither a beginning nor an end. Just as he is the first without beginning, so are his attributes, as they are, they say, intrinsic to him. Okay, so it has a little bit lengthy talk here. Nothing catches my eye that goes wrong here. So then he says, 16, bringing the creation into existence did not add anything to his attributes that was not there already. Now, even just this way of wording is weak. Bringing the creation into existence did not add anything to his attributes that was not there already. That's what they said. This means that Allah created all creations, and we do not say that he became the creator only after creating them, but rather that his name was the creator from eternity, without beginning. He creates in recurring instances. Really, he missed the mark here. So look, bringing the creation into existence did not add anything to his attributes that was not already there. This is how they translated the statement of Tahawiyy. Ours is, he did not acquire any attribute that did not exist before them. So then what's being denied here? What's being denied here is that he acquired an attribute by the existence of creations. So that's what we're denying. Like a place, for example. He says this means that Allah created all creations, and we do not say that he became the creator only after creating them. Okay. He didn't acquire the attribute of creating the creation by creating the creation. That's true. But rather that his name was the creator from eternity without beginning. But he said here, he creates in recurring instances. That's blasphemy. Here he creates in recurring instances. That statement is blasphemy. That's the belief of Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah said he wills from time to time. He wills, and then he wills again, and then he wills again. And Ibn Taymiyyah said Allah speaks when he wants, and he's silent when he wants. It's the same thing. What Ibn Taymiyyah says about the speech of Allah is what he says about the will of Allah. And that's what Fawzan is saying here. When he says he creates in recurring instances, that's blasphemy. What's correct is he creates in eternity. Things come into existence in their own times, and his creating is eternal with no beginning, not recurring. Recurring means created itself. Recurring is a synonym for created, because it means happening again and happening again and happening again. Happening itself means created. Occurring means created. Recurring means created again and again. So that's blasphemy. He attributed created attribute to Allah, trying to explain that Allah doesn't acquire any attribute that didn't exist in eternity. And then Tahawiy's quote goes on. Fawzan's translation says, his attributes are eternal without a beginning or an end. Yes. He says, as there was no beginning to his attributes, then so are his attributes intrinsic to him in the future. He doesn't know how to talk about the creed because he applies time to Allah. His attributes will be intrinsic to him in the future. Future doesn't apply to Allah. Future is time. Yes, recurring means stops. Well, recurring means starts again, and then starts again, and then starts again. So stops and starts, yes. He says here, with his attributes, Allah is eternal without end. The Prophet ﷺ said, you are the last and nothing is after you. وَأَنْتَ الْآخِرُ فَلَيْسَ بَعْدَكَ شَيْءٍ. That's the same hadith we were just quoting. A piece of it. When we said, وَأَنْتَ الظَّاهِرُ فَلَيْسَ فَوْقَكَ شَيْءٍ. You are al-Zahir and there's nothing over you. وَأَنْتَ الْبَاطِنُ فَلَيْسَ دُونَكَ شَيْءٍ. And you are al-Batin and there's nothing under you. Before that, the Prophet ﷺ said, أَنْتَ الْأَوَّلُ فَلَيْسَ قَبْلَكَ شَيْءٍ. You are al-awwal and there's nothing before you. وَأَنْتَ الْآخِرُ فَلَيْسَ بَعْدَكَ شَيْءٍ. And you are al-akhir and there's nothing after you. So that's part that Fawzan quoted right here. He said, you are the last and nothing is after you. So that means he validates the hadith. It says that goes for his names and attributes. It must not be said that these attributes will be separate from him in the future. Rather, they are essential to Allah the Most High, he says. All right. So there's something he's missing. I want to get back to our book here. There's something Fawzan is missing. Like a place, for example. He doesn't talk about that at all. When we say he did not acquire any attribute that did not exist before them. So, like what? Like a place. كان الله ولم يكن شيء غيره. Allah was and there wasn't anything else. And he did not acquire any attribute that did not exist before them. So after creating places and directions, he didn't get a place or a direction. So really, Fawzan doesn't believe in this statement, but he can't expose what he disagrees with here. Let's move on. Question 46. Did the scholars disagree about Allah gaining new attributes? No. Simple answer. Question 47. What if the Wahhabis restrict the consensus to the companions only? Well, how do we start talking about the consensus anyway? Because what Tahawiyy documented was consensus of the Muslims. The creed of Tahawiyy is the unanimous consensus of Muslims for belief. So we'll say to him, this is the consensus, what Tahawiyy said. So what if the Wahhabi restricts the consensus to the companions only? For an easy answer, I'd say to that Wahhabi, that's untrue. Consensus is not restricted to the Sahaba only. I would say that's not true. So what's he going to say? Yes, it is true. I'll say, no, it's not. If he says, yes, it is, I'll say, no, it's not. So, but what if he made this claim and I would say, that's not true. So what if he says, what's your proof? Here he can ask me for my proof because I made a claim. My claim is, that's not true. However, if it were me, even though he can ask me, I would say to him, well, that's a fair question. However, you made your claim first. So why don't you present your evidence before you ask me to present mine? Since this is all based on your claim in the first place. We wouldn't be even having this conversation had you not made that claim. Why don't you produce your evidence? And then we'll see what he has. Because he doesn't have any evidence that consensus is restricted to the Sahaba. Well, what is our evidence that consensus is not restricted to the Sahaba? Here's the statement of Imam Al-Haramain. وَإِجْمَاعُ هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ حُجَّةٌ دُونَ غَيْرِهَا. The consensus of this nation and not that of another is evidence. لِقَوْلِهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. Because of the Prophet's saying, صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ, لَا تَجْتَمِعُ أُمَّتِي عَلَى ضَلَالَةٍ. My nation will not gather on misguidance. وَالشَّرْعُ وَرَدَ بِعِصْمَةِ هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ. The religious law came with the infallibility of the nation, not the Sahaba, the nation. And that's what the Hadith says. Ummati, my nation, not ashabi, my companions. وَالْإِجْمَاعُ حُجَّةٌ عَلَى الْعَصْرِ الثَّانِي وَفِي أَيِّ عَصْرٍ كَانَ. The consensus is evidence for the following era and for any era to come. So it's not restricted to the Sahaba. Question 48. Is Imam At-Tahawiyy an authority? The answer is yes. No Wahhabi who has a little bit of education will deny this. Question 49. What is blasphemy? Now, where'd this question come from? This question came from us making takfir on the Wahhabis up until this point. All of what we said throughout all of these questions and answers amounts to deeming the Wahhabis as kuffar. Even while reading what Fawzan said, I told you that's kufr, he said. What is kufr? Question 49. Kufr is blasphemy, disbelief. It's the worst sin, absolutely. It's the sin that if you die with it, if you die without repenting from it, you will go to hell forever. That's the sin that just nullifies belief altogether. It's not possible for a person to have blasphemy and belief, valid belief. It is possible for a person to have valid belief and sins less than blasphemy. But it's not possible for a person to have valid belief and blasphemy. So blasphemy is going to nullify your belief. If you die without repentance from that, you will be in hell forever. Question 50. Can a person blaspheme without intending to? Yes. The answer is yes. Because of the hadith that you know, that the Prophet ﷺ said, Inna al-abda la yatakallamu bil kalimah. Indeed, the slave will certainly speak with the word. La yara biha ba'sa, without seeing anything wrong with it. Yahwi biha fin nari sab'ina kharifa. Because of it, he shall fall into the fire for 70 autumns. So when he said here, alayhi salatu wassalam, not seeing anything wrong with it, that proves that he could blaspheme without intending to. Question 51. Well, what if he says, I say the shahadah every day? Where did that question come from? This question comes from a person who commits blasphemy, yani dealing with a person who commits blasphemy, and then when you tell him that's blasphemy, you need to say the shahadah, he would say, as a way of not accepting that he committed blasphemy, though. Really, he's not accepting that he committed blasphemy. So he would say, I say the shahadah every day. Because if he accepts that he committed blasphemy, then he'll just say the shahadah. It doesn't matter that he says it every day. So when he says, I say the shahadah every day, it would be said to him, but you believe in blasphemy, though. So saying the shahadah while believing in blasphemy is not going to make you a Muslim. You have to get rid of the blasphemous belief and say the shahadah again. Question 52. Is it permissible to deem another as a disbeliever? The answer is, if done rightfully, then yes. If done rightfully, then yes. So the question for some people might be, though, what qualifies you to deem someone else as a disbeliever? Your answer should be being a believer. That's it. Knowing what's belief and what's kufr. I know what's belief and I know what's kufr. So he might say, well, you're not a scholar, though. Tell him, okay. I still know what's belief and what's kufr, and you committed kufr. So he might insist, you're not qualified. Tell him, yes, I am. Nobody ever said you have to be a scholar to know if something's kufr or not. If that's the case, you don't know that something's kufr. That's what I tell him. According to you, you don't even know if something's kufr or not. So he might say, there's a difference between knowing something is kufr and calling a person a kafir. Tell him. I would tell him. If somebody does kufr, he's a kafir. So if he says, no, it's not true, I'll tell him, stop talking. If you don't want to accept that you committed kufr and then fix your mistake, that's your problem. Question 53. Can I ask a disbeliever what he believes? Where'd this question come from? This question came from inside the book in the section where we're going over advice. We're going over advice here and also some tips on how to debate. So when you debate, you can't make a person say kufr. Meaning that can't be your goal. You cannot set him up to say kufr, which is what some debaters would do. They would set their opponent up to commit kufr on purpose. They lure him into the blasphemous statement on purpose. Why? Just so that he can commit to it. So that he will say it and commit to it. And then they will refute him after that because they made him say it. You can't do that. So you don't say to him, "Are you a kafir?" And you don't say to him, "Do you believe that Allah is over the throne?" And you know he does. Just like you don't say to an atheist, "Do you deny God's existence?" And you know he does. And you don't say to a Christian, "Do you believe Jesus is the Son of God?" And you know he does. Because you're leading him to say kufr. Because he's going to say yes. That's what you expect from him. Even if he doesn't say yes, that's what you expected though. So that would be kufr on your part. Some people, subhanallah, they denied that asking a kafir about his religion is kufr. There was some weak hadith that they relied on. Now, I don't have the hadith in mind. There is a weak hadith that they rely on though. And also, they rely on some statements in the Quran that they don't understand. For example, when Prophet Ibrahim said to his people, "Mādhā ta'budūn?" What are you worshipping? They would say to us, how could it be kufr to ask the disbeliever what he believes? Prophet Ibrahim said to them, "Mādhā ta'budūn?" What are you worshipping? The answer is, he was objecting to them. He knew what they were worshiping in the first place. If you really understood what's going on here, you would have known that he knows what they're worshiping. So he wasn't asking them so that they would tell him. He was objecting to them. That's a question for objection. That's istifhamu inkar. Istifhamu inkar. That's a question for objection. When you say to a person, "What are you doing?" Or like people say these days, "What are we doing?" They say we. But they mean, what are you doing? What's wrong? How could you do this? That's not asking so that you tell them why. That's objecting. And that's in the tafsirs. It was his ignorance that he thought that, because he doesn't know the tafsirs, he doesn't even know aqeedah in the first place. So he thought he could just ask someone. I'm not talking about Wahhabi here. Any person. Any person who thinks you can ask a kafir his religion, while you know he's a kafir and you expect him to admit to his kufr. What did Imam At-Tahawiyy say? Didn't Imam At-Tahawiyy say, if a person beat his child severely, or his slave boy, and then another person said to him, "How could you do this? Aren't you a Muslim?" And to that his deliberate answer was no. Then he blasphemed. The one who said no, not the one who asked him. The one who asked him didn't expect him to say no, so he didn't blaspheme here. The one who said no, he blasphemed because he's saying, "I'm not a Muslim." So what's my point? My point is, when the kafir says, "I'm a kafir," that's blasphemy. Just like when the person said, "I'm not a Muslim," that's blasphemy. Those people thought there's a difference between saying, "I'm not a Muslim," and saying, "I'm a kafir." So you can't ask him that. You have to be more clever when you debate with someone. And you don't need to know what he believes to refute him or to teach him, to give him da'wah, let's say. You don't have to know what he believes to give him da'wah, to give anyone da'wah, because it's the same da'wah. So can I put his name here? The Imam, which one? Imam Al-Haramain, about the father. Oh, An-Nawawi. That's in Mukhtasar. In the summary of obligatory knowledge, Imam An-Nawawi said, if a person hit his child or slave boy severely, and then another person said, "How could you do this? Aren't you a Muslim?" And to that his deliberate answer was no, then he blasphemed. So same thing. You don't say to him, are you a kafir? And he says, yes, that's blasphemy. And you led him to it when you knew it, when that's what you expected him to say. That's when it would be blasphemy on you. So instead of asking him what he believes, tell him the truth. Tell him Allah doesn't resemble the creations. Question 54. How do I avoid mistakes? Very easy. Don't speak without knowledge. If you know, then speak with knowledge and say what you know to be true. If you do not know, then say, I do not know. And that's how you're going to avoid mistakes. And do not be ashamed of saying, I do not know. Don't think that, don't be discouraged from saying, I do not know, because then someone's going to think you're weak or ignorant or something. Doesn't matter. If someone's clever, then he knows that when you say, I don't know, that's good. But you need to be careful. Sometimes your enemy could use it against you. If you say, I don't know, depending on what you're saying, he might say to you, why are you talking about this? You're not even qualified to talk about this. But you still need to say, I don't know if you don't know. That's it. Don't say wrong answers. Better to say, I don't know, than to say a wrong answer. Or to guess an answer. Even if it's the right answer, don't guess it. Just say, I don't know. That's better. If he gets on you there and says, you don't know, and you're having this conversation, tell him, well, look, I'll get the answer for you and get back to you if you want to. If you want to tell him that. Do you want me to get the answer for you and get back to you? If yes, then I'll get it back to you then. No problem. I just don't know though. If no, then khalas, we're done with this conversation then. Question 55. What do I do if the Wahhabi asks for proof? Famous Wahhabi move. He's going to say, what's your proof? Give him your proof. If you don't know the proof for what you're claiming, say, I don't know. I'll get back to you. That's if you want to get back to him. Or give him your proof. If you want to be able to give a person a proof, then don't talk about something unless you know the proof. Don't open the subject about something. And here's general advice for you. Don't bring up an issue without having knowledge behind it. Anything you say, have a detail behind it too. Sometimes you might not have a detail behind what you want to say. You want to make a point, and that's the limit of your knowledge in that issue. You can't go further. Then, if you need to say this one, then should be then your decisive answer. But if it's not your decisive answer and you said something that's the limit of your knowledge, and then he asks you more, then you're just going to have to say, I don't know, because you don't have more. What's your proof? You don't know, then you're going to have to say, I don't know the proof, or I'll get back to you. Otherwise, whenever you say anything, have something behind it, even if you don't bring it up. You don't have to bring it up. You don't have to bring up what you have behind it. It's just you set it up. You have it behind it. You have something you want to present. It's already reinforced before you said it. You have a knowledge behind it. Once you let that point out, that next one moves up. Is ready to be released if you have to release it. Question 56. How do I avoid being cornered? You shouldn't have a concern with avoiding being cornered, because if you're on the truth, there's no issue about being cornered. What's he going to do? Corner you into the truth? There's no issue there. What are you trying to avoid? Trying to avoid having to answer a question? Is that what the question means? How do I avoid being cornered? Means, what if you ask me something I don't want to answer? How'd you get yourself there? If what he asks you is not relevant, tell him that's irrelevant. It's not a matter of trying to avoid being cornered, though. Doesn't matter. What you're asking is irrelevant. Otherwise, if you're saying the truth, then just say the truth. And then last question for today, question 57. What if he tells me to prove him wrong after I ask for his evidence? Meaning, he made a claim, then you told him, what's your proof? And then he said, well, prove me wrong. Don't you ever fall into that. That's big amateur mistake right there. When he says, prove me wrong, then you tell him, no, you have to prove you're right. You ever see that one kafir guy? He goes to college campus and he makes a claim. And he says, now prove me wrong. That's fallacious right there. And then they will sit there and argue with him and try to prove him wrong. Or he might say, now convince me otherwise. And then they'll argue with him and he's not going to accept anything they say. So that's not the way to go. You tell him, you made the claim, you bring your proof. What's your proof? Now you might say, well, what if he gives me proof? Then you see what he says. And if you know how to respond to what he claims is proof, you respond. If you don't know how to respond, then if you want, say to him, I'll get back to you. Wallahu a'lam, Allah knows best. Any question?